Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today. Maybe you were intrigued by the title of a topwater crawdad, which is exactly what I'm going to talk to you about. It's a unique little technique that I'm not going to say I developed it because I'm sure someone else has done this, but it's a really good technique. So what is this technique, or when do you use this technique? Well, it's primarily a bank fisherman technique. I like to talk about bank fishing because it's primarily what I do. And there are certain things you have to do as a bank angler. There are certain techniques you can't use, right? You can't shake minnows in deep water from the bank, right? You can't, it's hard to punch mats in deep water because you're casting across all that and your lure's going down. Just the physics of bank fishing is different. So this is a good bank technique. What type of conditions or bodies of water? I love this technique for ponds, for golf courses, neighborhood ponds, kind of those, somewhere near farming or agriculture as well. Those ponds, and I don't care where you are, those type of ponds, when you get to July and August, they get choked up with vegetation. And that's when I like to use this technique. And a lot of times those types of bodies of water near farms or near golf courses or in neighborhoods, they get a lot of vegetation. It's not great vegetation. It's not lily pads. It's not hydrilla. It's sometimes like that scummy green junk where if you're using the exposed hook every single cast, you're pulling snot off your line. I've heard that the vegetation grows really a lot there because most of the time those types of ponds they're runoff, right? They're for stormwater. They catch the runoff from rain or from irrigation, and they end up in these ponds, and then that fertilizer goes there and it causes all the vegetation to kind of explode. So I don't know if that's true. It makes sense to me, so I'm going to run with it. But anyways, topwater craw. What is the BuzzCraw? First of all, this is one I just happen to have at my desk. This is the Ned Wacky Battle Bug. It's not the one I recommend for this technique, but it is my favorite to be used on jig heads and Texas rigs. So shout out to nedwacky.com. This is a great lure. But this is how I'll demonstrate with it. BuzzCraw. Crawdad, lure, extra wide gap, weedless hook, weightless. That's how you rig it. And that crawdad's going to sit up with the hook coming here across the bottom. Okay, now I think it's important to show you the lure that I recommend to use for this technique because there's a very specific reason I use it. This is the Yum Christie Craw. So there's two things about this bait why I think it's perfect for this technique. As you can see, it has the arms on it are those kicker arms, kind of like twin tail grubs on a spider jig or a curly tail grub. So as you swim that through the water or across the totter, those things are going to do their thing. And believe it or not, when those things are kicking, if you're crawling this along the surface, they will kick out a little bit of noise and they'll kick out some bubbles. Not as much as like a whopper plopper, but like they will make some racket, which is good. The second thing about the Christie Craw, which is actually probably like a quality issue, but it weirdly works in favor, is that Yum baits are very, very plasticky. They're kind of on the lower end, right? Like I don't use Yum stick baits because they're too rubbery. They don't sink as well. They're not quite as soft. But for this technique, we like it to be rubbery and plastic and bulky because that helps this lure be more buoyant. So the buoyancy of the Christie Craw as well as the two kicker claws are why I think this is the perfect lure for this situation. So you're gonna hook this thing weedless. That craw is gonna sit upright just as it is, and it's gonna crawl across the surface, and those claws are gonna kick, and they're gonna gurgle and kick like a prop bait. Not to the same extent, obviously, but they're gonna do the same effect as a buzz bait or a prop bait. Now, of course, if you were fishing a prop bait, you'd be getting junk on your line every single cast. So now if you're thinking about choked up small ponds and lakes, the other technique that's very, very commonly used is to use frogs. Who doesn't love using frogs, right? I think there's advantages to this technique over a frog. One is, I think you get much better hookups with this. If you get a blow up with this, you can just kill it and let this lure fall freely and naturally and give them time to kind of slurp it all the way in, or if they miss it, to come back underneath it and take it out. Versus a frog, that bass has got to come up, he's gonna have to pull that whole thing down because it's very, very buoyant because of its inflated nature. The second thing is you can fish this subsurface, right? A frog, you are limited to the surface. Versus this, you'll notice a lot of times when you're fishing these types of lakes in summer, you'll notice these kind of holes, right? Like almost like the size of like a pothole on a sewer hole, where you see like matted grass sitting on the surface, you see a gap. When you crawl to a hole, you can just let yourself slack and let those legs, the Christy crawl, just kind of kick down in that hole. And if there's one sitting there, they'll oftentimes come and pick it up. So you get a lot of versatility. You can fish at subsurface. It doesn't fall real fast, but I mean, most of the time in ponds like this, you're fishing probably in less than 5 feet of water, maybe 8 feet of water. So you might have to wait a little bit, but you can have the option to go top water right on the weeds across the surface, or drop it into holes where you suspect there's one hitting. So it's been a dynamite technique for me. I recommend any of the darker colors. The ones I picked up at Walmart the other day, I think it was this black blue flake. Again, they were $1 a pack, which was mind blowing. I think this watermelon red flake is kind of like my #1 color I like to use. So that's probably the one I recommend. But it's a great technique, good hookups. I've used it with a bait caster and a spinning rod. A lot of times in smaller lakes, you don't need to cast a country mile. So, you can probably cast for the spinning rod, but if you don't need to cast more than like 20 yards, or 30 yards or whatever, you might as well use a bait caster if that's what you feel more comfortable with. If you're using maybe 12-pound line or under. So that's the BuzzCraw Yum Christy Craw, extra wide gap hook, cast it out, 45-degree technique. Engage quickly to get the slack out of the line, keep that tension, and just crawl that thing across the surface or drop it subsurface whenever you feel the need. I hope that you catch some fish. It's going to be a few months before you're going to be using this technique unless you're living like Florida, but hope that it's something you may stick in your back pocket that will help you catch fish in the future. Thank you.